how does one deal with the science of empiricism when actually being in a place and on the ground becomes extremely difficult and sometimes not possible?
Well, I think there are different ways of being there. I mean, you know, we're both of us, the three of us, are being here at the moment, courtesy of Zoom. So I think this is a well-established area for discussion in so-called digital anthropology. The relationship between online and offline. And obviously, it's possible to investigate the offline virtually as well. So I think there's a lot one can do empirically in terms of talking to people, exchanging images, observing social practice, you know, even at a distance and through a digital filter. But I think one also loses a lot. So I think that the non-virtual pre-COVID being there, you know, conventional ethnography its productivity is largely about accident. So, you know, you miss a bus and you end up talking to someone that you wouldn't have otherwise talked to, or something happens completely unexpectedly. And I think this is where one could maybe make a parallel with the photographic event. They escape the intentions of the various actors involved. And I think that is more likely to happen in an embodied being there pre-COVID offline world. I mean, one of the other things that's come up, I suppose, more actively in the work of other members of the Citizens of Photography group, largely because they're younger, is that ethnography has now become a kind of endless series of reverberations via social media, so that when they're in the field, I mean, I've also had this experience up to a point, but so when we're in the field and we're posting images, research images, one might say, they get commented on by all your friends who are also often your interlocutors. So the active field work, I mean, it's very different from the classic colonial early anthropological Malinowskian model, you know, where you travel somewhere, all you're involved in doing is gathering data, compiling field notes in your secretive notebooks, and then returning to your point of origin to write them up in some positive form. I mean, all that is now hugely complicated, especially by the role of social media.
Citizens of Photography maybe rings to us now because of the complications around the idea of citizenship itself. What it means to the state and what it means to the individual are two different things. Is that could it have been a title that gave the medium perhaps a little more space?
The title of the project is really pretty much a direct quote from Ariella Azoulay's Civil Contract of Photography, or it may actually be a quote from her Civil Imagination, Political Ontology of Photography, which is a rather, well, a parallel work, we might say. In her theorization, then, photography, or the event of photography, produces the conditions for political claims and recognition through photography that are in advance of ordinary citizenship claims. So I think the key thing here is that, yes, as you say, it's about subaltern claims, political claims, but it's also about claims made in a future made present. So I think this question of what is available in advance of ordinary citizenship is key here. And I think in the project as a whole, we're very much focusing on the question of the future, futurity, the proleptic, the future made actual and tangible in the present. And I think there's a lot one can say about how photography makes that possible through its performative dimensions. So I think one of the things that Azoulay does by thinking about how these future claims, these subjunctive claims, so I think another person who would be very relevant here is the anthropologist Karen Strassler, who's done great work in Indonesia in a wonderful book called Refracted Visions. And there she talks about photography's as if claims, which one might think of as being subjunctive claims, that they're kind of hypothetical proposals about a possible future. But I also think that at the heart of her work and the heart of our interest in the project is the nature of the event. And it is very much medium focused. So I think all of us are really taking a cue from Walter Benjamin, and his little history of photography essay, where he writes rather brilliantly about what he calls the tiny spark of contingency. And so I think the idea there is that there's something about photography and the photographic event that makes it quite unlike most other media and most other kinds of events. I mean, the other thing, just briefly to add, is that the project Citizens of Photography, as you say, is ethnographic, and it's very much looking at popular practices. So it's taking the set of questions that Azoulay really formulates in relation to photojournalistic practice, tries to relocate them. So I think the other aspect of it is that we're trying to escape localizing cultural claims. So one way of doing that is to move from a model of photography as vernacular, which tends to emphasize a vertical dimension of hierarchical practices, to a horizontal axis of demotic. So what I've for long called the more than local, less than global, which I think is the space that most social cultural practice occupies.
How does one actually deal with the disciplinary quality of information flow right now? And maybe with respect to some of the work you've been doing in South Asia of late, in Nepal and Bangladesh.
The Lebanese performance artist Rabi Mroué, who makes this distinction between the tripod regime, the kind of fixed camera of the state, and the mobile fuzzy core image, to use that Hito style term, of citizen photography. And the questions you're raising also make me think of a rather remarkable film by, I think, Dibankar Banerjee, called Love, Sex or Doka, which was very much about sort of what one could call the grain of visualization. So as I recall, it's 3 short films sandwiched together that are shot in visually very different styles. That foreground the different cameras used. So I recall the first one was a novice filmmaking student. So it has visually speaking, there's a kind of acuity and a naivety to it. And I think the final of the sequences was CCTV in a Delhi all-night, 24/7 store. So it had that grainy quality of CCTV. And so first and foremost, rather than narrative per se or iconography, your attention is drawn to you could say it's a highly modernist project because it directs your attention to the surface of the screen and the grain of visualization in a very striking way.
From the sense of your project as well, where is the gaze of the photographer coming from, and who, if now that we are all sort of public photographers and kind of claiming and giving this citizenship, like what happens in that relationship to citizenship?
Well, I think there are broad genres of photography that are able to make different kinds of political claims. If one thinks of the George Floyd images, we don't know I don't think we have a name for a photographer or a videographer, whoever it was that shot that footage that has, been so elemental in sparking the reaction. So clearly one's talking about, I mean, this is a very different world from iconic images by named photojournalists.
Yeah.
If you share an image, you're not subtracting. You don't, I mean, the analog era, if you gave an image, you lost it. If you gave an image to someone, you lost an image. Now it's endlessly replicable. So, I mean, the dynamics, the exponentiality of the distribution has completely changed. I think the other thing to say about the digital and citizen photography is that one should be cautious about embracing it too enthusiastically, and because it's very easy in our academic and activist locales to imagine that everyone is sharing our sense of what's politically progressive. So one of the things that I've been focusing on as part of the project, thinking about, well, initially sparked by an argument made by a Nepali photojournalist called Min Ratna Brajacharya, whose photographs were used in a book with the subtitle "The Third Eye of Democracy." And so I did an interview with him in which he was elaborating on this concept. And this is something that when he talks to photography students in Kathmandu, he stresses very much that photography, the camera can be treated as a third eye, like Shiv's third eye, that can be used as part of progressive politics. But then thinking about that, and thinking about it in an Indian context and in the context of rural Madhya Pradesh, it struck a kind of dissonant note with an image that's long fascinated me, that was taken by a Madhya Pradesh villager who was walking down the main drag of his village and noticed on his left some other villagers placing the kalash on top of the Shiv temple. And just as he was passing, he saw this beam of fire being emitted by Shiv and hitting the top of this brass kalash and producing this amazing optical sort of shimmering refraction. And he whipped out his smartphone, photographed it, then had this image printed up and laminated, in fact at Suag Studio, coincidentally. And it then became an object of devotion in the village. So of course that's photography in the third eye, but in a very different kind of cosmological scheme.